How you doing? We're going to start on a new project here. My daughter bought a new house and the gates into the backyard are pretty much dilapidated. The whole fence is falling down, as a matter of fact. So I'm going to build her a gate, so something a little nicer than you would find at Home Depot or Lowe's or so forth. And so let's get the project started. We'll talk about the design first. So we are going to make the gates in the style of Greene and Greene. The Greene brothers were two architects that practiced in California in the early 1900s, and they are known for building some of the landmark examples of the arts and crafts, or if you prefer, craftsman style of architecture. And here is a gate that they had made for one of their houses. I believe this was from the Thorson house in I believe it was in San Francisco. You'll note that the slats on the gate, the middle pieces there, are sculptured. They have different cross sections. As they go up, they change, and that particular pattern where it changes like that is called a cloud lift. And I'm going to try to replicate that in the gates that I'm going to make for my daughter. Here's another example of one that someone built recently. This is from a site called This Is Carpentry, and this is somebody made a driveway gate with, and if you look at the center of it, basically has the same effect to it, the changing cross section. I made a pair of gates in this similar style at our previous house to get into the backyard, and you can see here I added some copper pipes in the middle to just give it a little bit different look to it, so that it wasn't all wood. And I'm going to try to copy this general effect onto the gate I'm making for my daughter. Also, I'm making one gate at the moment, but eventually I'm going to make another one for the other side of the yard. And I may change the style on that a little bit, but basically the construction techniques as we go through here are going to be pretty much the same as I'm showing you here. And I made a drawing of it so that I could get the proportions right. Unfortunately, I've been shooting this on the iPad, and it seems to be cropping things randomly, so I didn't get the whole image in here, but at least you can see the gist of it. And this other drawing showing the whole thing sideways. I find it's helpful to do a scale drawing because it's hard to visualize exactly what you're going to get sometimes without it. So this is the full picture, and you can see on the left there's a kind of a portal over the top of the gate, and so we'll be building the gate itself and that portal. Let's talk a little bit about the structure. Typically, when people make gates, they put the rails and stiles together, something like that, and then use a bracket to connect the two of them. There are also commercial brackets which you can get, which go across this way and screw into the wood. The problem with all these is you're depending on the strength of the screw connection in the wood, and over time that is going to loosen up just from the weight of the gate. So what will happen is, assuming this is the hinge side of it, the gate will start to droop, and there's no point in spending all this effort to make this thing and then have it look poorly in a few year or two down the road. By the way, this is not the material I'm using for the gate. I'm just using this to demonstrate. So what we're going to do is make a mortise and tenon joint, and what that consists of, I'll show you when we actually do it. You put a hole in the stile, and then the part of the end of the rail to make what looks like a tongue, and the tongue goes into the hole. The hole is the mortise, and the tongue is the tenon. And when you put those together, so basically a part of the rail is inside the stile, and once you glue that together, that is a very strong joint and will not sag. The gates that I previously made for my other house, that's how I did it, and they held up pretty good. So that's a kind of traditional way to do it. Now, time consuming, and there is some skill involved, so the alternative, and I'll show you this in a second how I did this, is to drill through the, let me hold it in the right orientation, drill through the stile all the way into the rail, and then put a dowel through both pieces. So that's an alternative way to do it. It's a little bit easier. It doesn't require as much. It's faster, a lot faster, and doesn't require as much skill. So as long as you're comfortable drilling holes, you can do this one. The other one is a little bit more involved, but I will show you how to do that. And this will give you a plenty strong joint. The other item to think about is how to attach the slats to the rails. Now, if we could mortise and tenon those in, also make a hole, a pit in there, and tenon the ends of the rails and ends of the slats rather, and put them down in there. The problem with that is you are going to get eventually going to get water in there regardless of what you do. No matter how well you waterproof it, there's going to be water going down into that joint. And once it gets in there, there's no way for it to dry out. So even though this is going to be made out of cedar, which is rot resistant, eventually that will rot out. And there's really no way to keep the water out of it. So it's a very good strong joint. You might want to consider, if you have kids that or large dogs or whatever throwing themselves against the fence, that would help to prevent it from breaking. But for our purposes, I'm not crazy about that arrangement, and it's also a lot more work. You could also, and I considered it, could also use the dowel method to do it. And if this was the rail and this was one of the slats, you could drill up and shove some dowels through it. That would give you extra strength. So again, if you have kids that are banging against the fence, running into it, running into their bikes, throwing balls against it, or you have a pet that's a good size that likes to jump against the gate, you may want to consider using the dowels to put the slats on. But I'm going to use screws. I did this in my previous gates, the ones I showed you. It worked fine. Now, we weren't throwing ourselves at the gates, but I do have 2 golden retrievers, and they didn't manage to break through it. So I think that's probably plenty strong enough. And what that will consist of is, if this is the rail, just a section of it, and we put the slat down here, what we're going to do is screw up through there, and we will put a counter bore into the rail, and then put the screw in from there. The reason for the counter bore is that because you're going through you'd be going through a 2x4, and that's quite a distance here. You'd need very long screws, and they get expensive, and it's also they get larger and larger as the length. You can't get it's hard to get the smaller diameter ones in the longer lengths, so you would have a tendency to have to get larger ones, and that might, when you put the slats on here, it would be hard to put them up in there without breaking out the side of the slat. So and by doing this, should have drawn that a little better. Hang on a second. By counter sinking that like that, and then doing the screw, we can use a much shorter screw, still get plenty of penetration into the slat itself, and that will take care of that. On the bottom, this will not matter because that'll be down. We'll just make sure that we get plenty of preservative up in there in those holes, and there'll be some splash up from it when it rains, but it shouldn't hurt anything. On the top, That's the world's shortest gate, right? That was funny, so you would better have laughed. What we'll do is we'll do the same thing. But I'm going to put a decorative piece on top of that going across, and that will cover all the holes. And the other thing I will do is, before we put that on, I will run a bead of clear silicone across that right above the holes, so that when we push that down, it seals that. And then that will keep the water on the top side, anything that hits it there, from going into those holes and rotting it out, as I discussed earlier. So that's pretty much basics of the structure. Here's a material list. We need 2 4x4s 10 feet long. 3 feet will go in the ground. I originally intended to use pressure treated lumber, but I couldn't find any that weren't twisted like crazy, so I ended up using Douglas fir, as you'll see later. A 4x6 for the top beam across the portal, and that was pressure treated. I got a 10-footer. And the 2x4s for the frame of the door, the gate itself. Going to need one 8-foot and one 12-foot. And the 1x8s for the slats, I ended up using 2 12-footers and one 6-foot. And also there was a 1x4 for the center slat that was that was also 6 feet. You may not be able to get 6-footers depending on where you are, so you may have to use 8-footers. Just something to be aware of. I left off the pipes by accident here, so you're going to need two 10-foot long, half-inch diameter copper pipes. If you don't want the pipes, you can substitute another 1x4 board in there. But that's what I use, the pipes. And as far as the rest of it is concerned, we're going to use 1 bag of concrete. We're not going to set the post in concrete, but I am going to mix a little concrete in with the soil just to stabilize it a little bit. 1 bag should do it. We're going to need a pint of exterior glue and 2 different kinds of screws. We're going to need 3-inch and 2.5-inch, 1 pound of each. And just be aware that you need to make sure that these screws do not stain cedar. If you use normal galvanized screws, you'll get a black stain where the screws go through. It's unsightly, so make sure that whatever you use, you can use stainless steel or a screw that has a coating on it that specifically will not stain cedar. We're going to need 4 lag bolts total, that are 9 by 3/8 inches, and they can be galvanized because nobody's going to see them. If they do stain, nobody will see it because it's going to be on the top. A pair of black hinges, 8-inch. You can use any color you want, but that's what I'm using. We're going to need a gallon of preservative for the post. Actually, you don't need a gallon. You probably need about a quart, but I think you can only buy it in a gallon. And the finish, you're going to need a gallon of that, and just any exterior stain or clear finish that has a waterproofing preservative effect. 1 tube of clear caulk. And we're going to make the latch out of wood, and it's a good idea to put a little wax on the latch so that it slides better once it's finished. You may have that laying around the house already, so you may not need that. And that'll pretty much cover the materials. And after, when I do the wrap-up for the project, I'll go over the cost of all this, because at the time I did this, I did not know exactly what this stuff was going to cost. You could use pressure-treated lumber in place of the cedar. It's a little bit cheaper. It does make the gate heavier. I think the cedar looks better, and it does, as I said, make the gate lighter, which means it's less likely to cause a sag. But, if you want to use pressure-treated lumber, that's fine. So here's the tools we'll need. Safety glasses, as always, should always wear them. You need some marking tools here, pencil of course, tape measure. Folding ruler is helpful if you have it, but it's not critical. Tape measure will do it. A square, adjustable square is probably your best bet, but any square will do. And if you have one, a mortise marking gauge. If you do not have it, it's not a big deal. You can just set the combination square to the where you want it and use that to mark from the edges in to show where the mortise is going to be. So that's optional. If you don't have that, don't worry about it. We will need some chisels and some kind of hammering instrument to drive them. Now the mortises are going to be 3/4 of an inch, so you're going to need a 3/4 inch chisel. Make sure your chisels are sharp too. I also used a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch. These are not critical. It just makes it a little bit easier to clean the waste out of the mortise. But if all you have is a 3/4, that's fine. I prefer these dead blow mallets for doing the chiseling, but a regular hammer is fine as long as the chisels have the unbustable handles on them. You wouldn't want to hit a wooden handled chisel with the hammer. You definitely want to use some kind of mallet for that. So that's that. We're going to need a drill and various drill bits. I'm going to use a 5/8 inch Forstner bit to clean out most of the debris in the mortise, and then we'll chisel it out to clean it up. A long bit to drill a pilot hole for the screws that are going to hold the slats onto the rails, and we'll need a bit to countersink those screws. So we will, depending on what screw you use, that will be you want that slightly larger than the head of the screw. If you decide to do the dowel method rather than the mortise and tenon method, you're going to need a 5/8 inch spade bit to drill the holes through the stiles into the rails. So that's that. You'll need a screwdriving bit appropriate to the whatever screws you're using, or you can use a screwdriver if you prefer to do that. It helps to have an impact driver when driving the screws, but if you don't have one, that's fine. Just use the drill or the screwdriver. And we'll obviously have to cut some things, so bare minimum you'll need is a hand saw and a coping saw. If you have a circular saw handy, you can use that in the coping saw to do the cutting. If you have a saber saw, then you won't need the other saws. You can just use this for all of it. It is helpful but not critical to have a block plane or regular plane, and spoke shave comes in handy for cleaning out the corners. But again, if you don't have either of these items, these are optional, not the end of the world. You can use sandpaper, and you will need some sandpaper for the project. You'll need some 80 grit and probably 120. You probably don't need to go any finer than that. So if you don't have the spoke shave, we'll just use a sandpaper to clean that out. And we will need when it comes time to put the hinges on, we'll need a wrench, either an adjustable wrench or a wrench that fits the bolts that come with the hinges. So not an enormous pile of tools. These are most probably, if you're doing projects, most of this you have laying around, and as I said, some of the optional stuff, it's not critical. We can work around it. So that's your tool list. In part 2, we will work on the frame for the gate, the rails and stiles, and we'll talk about how to mark everything out and how to make those mortise and tenon joints. So thanks for watching. Hope you found this entertaining, and thanks as always for subscribing and for liking and for hitting that notification bell. So we'll see you in the next time.